Welcome to the Sport in Crypto podcast, where we talk to leaders in Web3 and sport. It's season 2, and joining me on today's episode is Herman Narula, CEO and co-founder of Improbable. How are you, man?
Good. Wonderful. Yeah, it's nice and cold outside. And Arsenal's recently done well, so, you know.
I was actually at we're recording in November. I was actually at the Sporting Lisbon game.
I see.
Sporting Club de Portugal, they like to call it.
I've just realized that actually by the time this goes out, this might seem really bad, given the inconsistent performance of my team.
Touch wood.
Yeah.
Why don't you begin by telling the audience a bit more about yourself, your journey, and for those that don't know what Improbable is, what you folks are up to?
Sure. So Improbable is a deep technology company that is probably best known for building the most advanced technology to support large-scale virtual worlds. So everything from Major League Baseball to Yuga Labs to game developers, we've helped to create new experiences that wouldn't otherwise be possible. But actually, we've expanded beyond that remit quite a lot. We started the company off with a very narrow focus, and since then, we've discovered our technology had applications in all kinds of areas. So we've become kind of a venture builder, creating new companies around the key technologies that we think are going to be the foundations for the new economy. And, we've done everything from defense. I'm actually sanctioned by Russia now because of that work. We sold that last year, so I can talk a bit more about it. And we're actually launching a new blockchain as well, which is taking some of our insights into how to build that type of infrastructure and applying it at really big scale in Web3.
You didn't mention the word metaverse.
I did not say the word metaverse. Yeah, I did write a whole book about it, but
tell me about that.
So yeah, look, I think the metaverse is one of those buzzwords that a lot of executives and business people have decided or did decide, represent some kind of vague future. And for me, it's been like it's a much more important concept than that, one that is really rooted in the fundamental needs that people have, right? I think when you walk into a stadium and you see all those people staring, crying, laughing, they're not just being entertained. Something much more important is happening there. And for me, the metaverse is a mechanism by which we fulfill more people with whatever that thing is that's happening in that stadium, and understanding how metaverses really come together, what their underlying economics are, how the technology behind them works. That's what my book Virtual Society was all about. And I think the word has maybe become a bit overused.
And I think it's a word that took a lot of heat over the last couple of years, especially as it attached itself to the hip of the kind of crypto market cycle to some extent, which I think was a bit weird in retrospect. I always thought it was a bit weird, but I do think there were a lot of blockchain companies that jumped on that hype cycle, raised a lot of money, sold a lot of crypto assets to the public, and promised a lot of things that much of it wasn't fulfilled. And there were a lot of virtual worlds built that had no users, that were using blockchain technology and as the underlying infrastructure. They had their own governance token. They had ownable land or NFTs within these virtual worlds. Where do you think we are in that kind of current cycle?
Well, look, I think some of that was genuine grift. Like being a technology company in this space, able to fulfill a lot of the promises that people made. We had folks approach us after they had already sold assets with no idea how they would execute on what they promised, being like, can you fix it in Improbable? And we were like, absolutely not.
It's just crazy,
make your
man.
bed and live in it, right? And I think for a lot of the more legitimate projects that actually do take time and energy to build up, they now face a very hostile market, because of that. So I think that was just greed. I think the challenge with crypto, one of the reasons why we're building our own blockchain, why should we even have to? It's been 14 years. Why should Improbable have to build a super high performance EVM compatible chain, right? Like somebody else should have done it by now. Is that the incentives in this space are really perverse. In many ways, you can make more money by not delivering something than you can by delivering it. And I think, now that the regulatory situation around crypto, particularly in the US, is likely to resolve much more favorably, just given the election, I think we're going to see a lot more serious players come in and execute very professionally and crush the kind of grifters.
That would be good.
I think it's going to happen. There's an economic reason to do it, right?
Yeah, I think the incentive alignment is very interesting because I think this current cycle that's just happened was a very important one in the sense that we had some companies that don't have infrastructures, don't have tokens, do pretty well. There is Pump.Fun. I know they create tokens but don't have their own. There is Polymarket. They utilize crypto but don't have their own token. There is Bridge that were acquired by Stripe for $1.1 billion, a stablecoin company that of course don't have their own token. That's probably the first big non-token VC exit for a lot of VCs. That's important, isn't it? Because although you've, as you said, have had to build your own infrastructure, it is important to show the world, the market, this space, that you don't necessarily need one to be successful.
No, completely. But I think like the important thing to appreciate about crypto is it's not just technology. It's also a business and social innovation. So a lot of the kind of accoutrements of VC around tech companies, they imply a sort of an economic evolution of a business and how it monetizes that may not be the same for like a really great crypto company. You know, I think it's going to be some weird hybrid. Like crypto companies effectively go public when they're in the startup idea stage, you know, so liquidity kind of comes out very differently to a sale or to an exit.
It is quite, you know, I've been talking about this a lot in my writing. It's really weird, really weird if you have a consumer facing product where the consumers are equity holders, the VCs are equity holders, the team are equity holders, and then third party traders can also buy and sell equity without using the product, and they can be in Brazil or Turkey or the Netherlands, and they all have the same access very early on in a company's life cycle. That creates some really weird like buy and sell dynamics and big sell pressures when companies don't do well. And sometimes I think there are some lessons to be learned from that. And I think the Web 2 premise of like waiting till the company's mature and has enough thick liquidity on either side of that market to go public is actually probably something that doesn't need to be rewritten. And I think we're seeing and have seen some pretty good companies that have been very performant and have done very well and grown, but their token price hasn't gone up.
Yeah, and I think, look, the other thing about looking at tokens in a unidimensional way as an equity analog or as a pure currency is that neither of those quite captures what they are, right? I mean, in a sense, I think sometimes we're still learning the patterns because, like, you know, I can see a scenario where having early access to like a utility token, which is traded or owned by people based on prospective usage, can work, right? For example, if you were building a virtual stadium that really could support thousands of people, not like 10 people, and therefore the ad space inside it had value, you know, you could pre-sell tokens that represent access to aspects of that stadium. Those could get traded in a reasonably healthy market long before the stadium was ever built. You know, and if there was a tier one team looking to do matches in it and a way for that to be long-term revenue, I mean, I can see that being quite an efficient thing for the market to do. Equally, I think the idea of like, you know, being in a position where multiple businesses can own infrastructure together, that's really cool. So the idea with M Squared on Metaverse Network is that, you know, in a sense, every big partner kind of owns part of it. And for that, having a notion of a token has made that a lot easier. You know, where otherwise you'd have like thousands of pages of complex legal interactions that would completely stifle the ability to really build that infrastructure. But I think if you, to your point though, I think it's that if what you're doing is just trying to get liquidity, you know, let's learn from what's worked in Web 2 rather than trying to like play a penny stock kind of game.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analog actually, like the meme coins, penny stocks, equity tokens, they're not quite there, but like it's buckets that we can almost fit into them. I want to go back quickly to, you mentioned people building virtual worlds that had no users in them. Too early?
Technology just wasn't there. You can't build. I mean, let's start with why should anyone enter any virtual world, right? Well, we know because there's 30 years of research behind it. It's not rocket science, right? We know that there are basically three reasons: competence, autonomy, and relatedness. The reason why people engage with interactive experiences is because they want to feel like they're getting better at something, to make meaningful choices, or to matter to other people in a social context. If your world does not provide a better experience in that regard than the rest of the market, which includes Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, and all of those things, which are not going anywhere, then no one will use it, right? And the main problem that these worlds had is that they were poorly executed, even by the standards of an early 2000s video game, right? Graphics, infrastructure, technology, they barely ran, they had terrible UX.
And the excuse was like, not the excuse, but the counter to that at the time, which I really didn't buy into, by the way, but I kind of I think thought it was a competent argument was like, well, Minecraft isn't like that.
Yeah, except Minecraft actually was dramatically more efficient and effective than those games and could provide a genuine autonomy experience you couldn't get anywhere else, right? And I think that's the challenge with games is like copying an old game doesn't work. You need to do something new. But also I think a lot of them, there was another aspect of how they misled things. I think the other excuse I heard was, oh, it's because they're crypto and, the blockchain is slow. But none of these games actually did anything on the blockchain, right? So that wasn't the reason either. I mean, I think it was more because these teams just didn't have deep technical experience or much games or execution experience. And I think one of the things we've tried to change now with our venture builder is like actually back game developers who are good at making games, right? Who might want to try this stuff.
And actually I wrote this so many times, I can't even remember how many, but what Decentraland, for example, did is actually incredibly impressive. Like to build a virtual world and then decentralize it and be governed by its users and token holders, whatever it may be, that is really difficult to do.
But did they really do it? I like what Decentraland have done in that they tried to put all of this into the public consciousness.
Sure.
But Phil Rosedale, who created Second Life, who's on the board of M Squared, Second Life today is more that than, with hundreds of thousands of users.
Absolutely.
You look at the CCU count right now of Decentraland and it's probably less people than are in this building, right?
And that's exactly like what I was writing at the time was kind of like, this is still really impressive. And it took so much effort, resource and aligning so many people globally and used blockchain in a really competent way. And yet the net result is at its peak had 5,000 daily active users or whatever.
Yeah, and I think also, again, we're dealing with a really small team of folks that then decentralized, and also a team that, more power to them, made a hell of a lot of money before ever having delivered anything, right? And what is your incentive in that scenario, right?
So I want to pivot us a little bit to sports. Adam Silver recently at the yearly kind of NBA AGM type thing said that 99% of fans will never go to an NBA game. Do you think the type of technology that you're building can help?
We already know it can, right? We've already seen this year, we've done over 100 events, including Major League Baseball matches broadcast into the metaverse. We've seen thousands of people not just watch the game in a new way, but actually socialize with each other where they never would have met each other before. And I think this is the main point here, which is the social experience of sport is the fucking heart of sport, right? Probably shouldn't have sworn there, but let's go with that. I'm very passionate about this. But that social experience is also denied to most people. If you're a Arsenal fan in Singapore, what exactly are your options for ever meeting other Arsenal fans, around the world, ever being in the stadium, ever really engaging with a player? One of the coolest things we did is get Alex Zinchenko into a virtual world to just hang out with people who clicked the link on Twitter, all of them together, seeing him, and back and forth. And it turned into like this post-season interview session where he just started answering questions, dancing with people, interacting with them in a way that I've never seen, happen in a real setting. So yeah, I think most people aren't going to come to a match. Most people also, as young people, like now, I was looking at some data, like a lot of kids know the entire score of a game. They can tell you everything that happened, but haven't even watched the match, right? Because they're consuming it in the form of clips and they expect things to be a lot more interactive. So I think, sport will need to find an entirely new engagement model to maximize the revenue that it captures and to create like a lasting relationship, especially with young fans.
It's also expensive to go to games.
Yeah, and you make really very little money per fan in sports, right? What is it? Real Madrid or Barcelona will have like 400 or 500 million fans, and they'll make on average less than $1 a year from those fans. Whereas Call of Duty will make $5-6 a month from you. That there's something really off about that.
There is also something, I think, cultural about Europe versus US and that. I remember speaking to a business who were like, I won't name them, but they were doing NFT goods for NFL teams. And they were like, we've made this much money in the last 12 months. We're raising it this much to break into Europe. And I was like, did you know that the average NFL fan spends about 7 to 11 times more per person
100%.
than a football fan
100%.
in Europe? And they were like, And I was like, so like, the raise you're going for, divide it by 7.
No, completely. And I think the other challenge here is the expectation that the only purpose of these new technologies is purely more monetization fails to account for the second really important thing that fans do, which is they perform a form of labor that perpetuates your brand. They do that by engaging with other fans. They do that by committing and making fan art and engaging and talking and doing this stuff. I think it's equally as important to have a medium for that to happen, because as people's fandom deepens, as they can point to more important and meaningful relationships that they have around the sport or hobby, their propensity to spend will increase significantly, right? And I think you get to a place where I think the other delta is like, what is the 0.1% most hardcore fan spend versus the average fan? And it's like literally hundreds of times that amount, right? I think sport can learn a lot from hobbies like Warhammer, where I'm a big Warhammer fan, and Games Workshop's UK company, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they make models and they also have a vast IP empire. But the amount of money spent on average by the hardcore fan of that, it's ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, hundreds of pounds a month. And they then also encourage their children to get into the hobby too. It's like a generational thing.
Yeah. I want to quickly talk about MLB Virtual Ballpark, because the reason when we've written about that, covered it, and why I've liked it is because it's been able to integrate all of the MLB's Web3 partners. And I think that one of the major missteps, and I understand why it's happened in the sports industry from a blockchain partnership perspective, is they've siloed them. And I understand why, right? You want to cut those rights as thinly as possible to maximize value. But actually, when this technology is inherently allowing you to connect those pieces, it's a shame that we don't see more of it.
Yeah, but there's another challenge to that, right? There's another perverse incentive, which is you can make so much money from being bribed by Web3 companies who just want to pump a token that it's inefficient to actually deliver the combined experience you're talking about. Yeah. Why not just sell on the rights? One of the great things about the MLB relationship for us, obviously we can't go into details, is that our relationship didn't look like that. There was a genuine commitment from both sides to go build something important, and the measure of its success is very much its genuine benefit to fans. And that for me has been a great blueprint. I mean, I would like to work with other sports. We wanted to deliver and make sure that they could work well for MLB, but it's kind of not the sport you'd pick, because the average age of a fan is like 54, but it was surprising how many people showed up.
But maybe that's why they were so committed to it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an element of that. I also think, look, if you're the NFL, you don't feel a sense of fear right now about the need to engage young people in a different way.
Especially when you see the NBA's broadcast deal, 75 billion over 10 years, and yours is coming up at the end of the decade. You're like, oh, well, we've got a marker there.
Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, and I think, look, is there a risk that these sports are, decimated with the lack of young people's engagement in the next 5 years? No, of course not. But is there a risk that the attention, the kind of soul of what the very young people now, 8 to 9 to 10 years old, who grow up, are they going to have less of a relationship with the sport? Yes, I think there is a risk of that. And I think that's a problem that will manifest a decade or two from now. And we see this now already with like the kind of rise of really weird types of new media that just don't have any resemblance. I mean, have you seen Skibbity Toilet?
I know the word.
I think anyone listening who's works as an executive in sport can learn a hell of a lot from Skibbity Toilet. Skibbity Toilet is basically, I guess you'd call it like a TV show, but it was created out of TikTok clips. Now, these TikTok clips are it's kind of like a fight between, I guess, toilet people and non-toilet people, played out in the Half-Life kind of engine. And it's had something like 70 billion. Like it's I mean, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's one of the most viewed things on Earth. Like, let's put it that way. Made by some guy, I think, in Georgia, and he's like just raking in vast quantities of money. And for kids, I mean, it actually introduced a word into the lexicon, right? You know the words, but you don't know the thing.
I know the word, but only because I have a younger brother.
I mean, there we go, right? I mean, I was shocked when I started watching it. It kind of was actually pretty good. Like, I was kind of impressed. It turns into this whole like epic war movie involving like the camera-headed people and then the other bad guys, and there's no word, there's no dialogue. It's all just action. But I mean, like these types of things need to be harnessed. And to harness them, I think you need to create this very interactive relationship with young people.
When you were connecting, I just want to go back on the connectivity from the Web3 partners. You're right, there has not been an incentive to do that much, but I think that's going to change in the next cycle.
Yeah, but also it was a technology problem. Yeah. Like we had an actual platform where you could reasonably integrate all these things, right? I mean, other than that, what would you integrate them into, right? There wasn't like with M Squared, it's like you're building a world, you as MLB or as a partner, you own that world. You're not a client of ours in the same way. You actually have sovereignty over your own platform with the technology. You can define the relationship with users. You can actually enter into contracts with third parties. I mean, without that being true, you couldn't do that on Roblox or Fortnite. And that's kind of the problem. Those things are really popular, but they are not that great to build businesses on.
And they're also, I'm not bearish about those things, by the way, at all.
I'm not either.
They just feel like the next iteration of social media, where you pay someone to deliver content in a digital realm, and you are hoping to accrue lots of engagement from it. And I guess there is a slightly better monetization element directly. We've seen, Man United sell digital kits and other people sell digital items. I do think that's probably a very small percentage of the total audience.
Oh, completely. Look, I think Roblox and Fortnite should be an important part of the metaverse strategy of a brand. But I don't think they allow a brand to actually own a channel, build something, and invest significant sums in doing that, right? I think the whole idea that as a brand, you should just license away your IP to folks, I think is a challenging way to execute this new area. I think you need more in-house expertise. It's the same way that you wouldn't kind of, franchise away your fan engagement. Like that's something you would do. And I think you've got to kind of have your own platforms as well as have distribution channels like those.
Can you give us some headline stats on the MLB Virtual Ballpark activation?
Sure. So, I mean, we're looking here at, thousands of unique users are coming into these events, and also staying for, I think on average, something like 80 minutes. Last year, there was one big game that maybe I can highlight where I think the number was in excess of 10,000 people, more than were even at the real stadium. So I think, a lot depends on distribution and marketing, but we can see there's genuinely interest in this. We had people singing, interacting. There's a whole crowd of people by home plate that just, for the entire 3 hours, perpetually kept up a heart emoji behind that plate while the match went on. And the thing I'd say to anyone listening is like, everything's different when you have more than a couple hundred people. I don't know exactly why, but it's been a consistent theme over hundreds of experiments. The moment you hit a critical mass of people who can all speak and see each other, which is really hard technically, but once they can do that, their behavior completely changes. They start to feel as though they are engaging in a meaningful social experience. Mm-hmm. They start to, you get little cliques forming, groups forming, you see culture kind of emerging. And people are weirdly well behaved as well. Like you'd think people would troll like crazy, but they don't.
Where do you think other rights holders can learn from this experience that you've helped?
I think experimentation is everything, right? The rights holders have a tendency to want to do one or two really big, meaningful things with, guarantee of a certain amount of outcome. And you're just not going to get that in the metaverse space. And I think it's always the challenger brands who tend to take those risks, figuring out a framework where a rights holder can say, okay, I'm going to take some metaverse experimentation. Something, selfishly, we do this with partners, but even if it wasn't with us, I'm going to execute some things that I'm going to put a lot of internal attention to. I'm going to target a tiny fraction of my overall fan base, but I'm going to try to really engage them, including with the talent. And then I'm going to learn from those patterns what I can re-execute. Even something like broadcast, we had to build our own broadcast framework.
I was going to ask about that. Like, how does the broadcast rights really expensive? How does that work?
So the beautiful thing about what we did with MLB is that they were a rights holder that already had access to the matches. And more than that, they had field vision. So they basically, we were actually doing two things. We were broadcasting the matches on screens, but more importantly, we were bringing the movements of the players directly into the virtual world. So this is kind of a really cool additional way to watch. And I got the impression most people were actually looking at that because they could interact more directly with that experience. So I would say with rights holders, there's a tendency to think that it's the match itself that you should put there. But what about the pregame or the postgame? You don't actually need the broadcast rights to create a social experience that accompanies what people are already doing in their homes.
It's really interesting because obviously you'd think the broadcast element that's the golden goose for most sports rights holders, and being able to find a way to bring that into that environment whilst also having this pre-post and also kind of configuring the real-time movement thing is pretty unique.
I think that whether or not you actually broadcast a match in the metaverse, people have TVs, right? The exciting part is, can I socialize with other fans? So getting, say, a really charismatic and talented presenter or some players into a fan zone in a virtual space while the match is happening, ticket it, make it something that your international fans can then, at a much, much lower rate than the stadium tickets, maybe you let 30,000 fans per region, hop into a fan zone. That kind of thing could get really interesting, especially if then when you're broadcasting the match, you can actually cut to the reactions of the virtual fans. The other thing the virtual fans can bring is much more rich reactions, much more memeable things.
Before we move on to part 2, where we look into the future a little bit more, I am really happy to remind you that this podcast is sponsored by the HBAR Foundation. The most beloved sports brands understand that what fans want is simple, a reason to be passionate. The HBAR Foundation enables brands and fans to share their passion on-chain using the Hedera network, the most used sustainable enterprise-grade DLT for the decentralized economy. Visit linkedin.com/company/HBAR Foundation to learn more and get the latest HBAR Foundation and Hedera news. This podcast is also supported by Credenza. Credenza harnesses blockchain technology to power a real-time data synchronization platform that transforms customer data ecosystems. They make data more relevant and actionable for sports brands, teams, leagues, and IP owners. Find out more at credenza3.com. Welcome back to part 2, and this is where we go for a few broader questions to get your hot take on them. If you're a rights holder right now, where do you think the biggest opportunity for you is in kind of Web3 blockchain innovation?
A lot of rights holders are jumping straight to what can I sell? But I think before you sell something, you have to give people a new experience from which the things you sell will derive value. So for me, if I was looking at a major sport, whether that's football, British football, NFL, basketball, I would immediately start to create fan stadiums or fan zones or fan communities where there's an opportunity to let your international audience interact with knowledgeable fans and, more importantly, the talent. And creating a kind of steady drumbeat of casual experiences, especially in between major matches, could create an entirely new dimension for advertisers and also for, frankly, like community engagement. I think the second thing to say is like, a lot of this has to be a bit more decentralized. You've got to let the fan clubs, the kind of folks who are really passionate about your brand, create a lot of these experiences from which you can then see what patterns of gameplay and fun make sense. And I think the other big opportunity then is to say, okay, with properly interoperable digital assets and with standards like Metaverse Markup Language, open source, which we created, you can actually make assets that work in Fortnite, in Roblox, in your own metaverse and on social media. And then there's a chance to actually build things people want to buy and that have value. I also think crossovers are really useful. Like interactive experiences are different from passively watching something. So what can you partner with or crossover with to create an experience that takes your brand, your IP, and then maybe something else that fans are really engaged with? I think that's probably the biggest opportunity.
I've been writing a lot about how little sports teams, leagues, and IP owners know about their fans over the last probably 12 to 18 months specifically. And I think this technology becoming a big MarTech unlock for some of these, where you speak to a CCO at a sports team and they're like, our CRM is our season ticket holders. That's it.
This probably will be a huge problem. And I'll tell you why it'll be an even bigger problem than people realize. The value to advertisers of this type of access is going to fall off a cliff because of AI. What we're seeing right now is, and this is some other work we do in our venture builders, like we're seeing that the personalized relationship between a chatbot and a user mean that it's a very interesting environment in order to seed new products or also to understand more about them. And what that does is it means that untargeted channels with very little and very coarse understanding, like typical digital advertising, are going to take a hit. And I think you're going to find that marketing budgets are going to go a lot more to more precise things. So if you're trying to sell access to a community that you know nothing about, can't really target to, can't really suggest kind of interactive relationship with, I think it's going to be really tough to make that work. And I don't think a lot of brands have built the infrastructure that they need.
A lot of marketers like to say that personalized marketing is not a fad, but just doesn't work at scale, as in you are more likely to get better attribution and conversion if you send 500,000 emails to that audience, to 500,000 people, rather than like 10,000 to these people that live here or like this or do this. I think two things, right? One, I think that is different for sports fans. Like fundamentally, your relationship as a fan is, you are still a customer, but it's so completely different to you being a customer of Starbucks. That's why, when the Starbucks Odyssey Web3 loyalty program came out, I was like, this is really awesome and well executed, but like, I don't really give a crap about Starbucks. I really care about Arsenal, though. That was my thing. That was my take at the time. And, even though it was really well done, I think they shuttered for obvious reasons because people didn't care that much for them to monetize appropriately. Secondly, I think when you have a completely different paradigm with what we'll see with AI in the next 10 years, where you'll have your own kind of like digital butler, you'll have this kind of less app-driven, less website-driven experience with the web, where a lot of this stuff is obfuscated and done for you. There's kind of more of a personalized interface, so to speak. That becomes a whole different ball game for people to advertise into. And I think those two things converging, where personalization from an advertising perspective does work for sports fans, because if you say to someone, hey, we're doing a whatever event because you were in Lisbon for the sporting game where we had our record away win, like that's a small crowd, but it's important. And the compounding effect of that is also very important.
I agree. And also I think, again, detail here matters, right? You're right that like there are arguments sort of for and against the expense of that type of personalization. But when we're talking about how AI will disrupt digital advertising, we're not talking only about that. The most likely way in which a person gets into a sport or a new hobby is their friends tell them about it. That is what this is. This is a person that, there are millions of people today in relationships or having romantic interactions, mostly women, interestingly enough, with chatbots. There are services online right now which are growing, like skyrocketing popularity, where people are interacting with NPCs from games they've interacted with, whatever that might be. And those are very powerful relationships. It's very easy to turn up our nose at them and be like, oh, that's insane. However you feel about it morally, that's the future now. And people are going to have a lot of meaningful interactions with almost entirely automated, intelligences and personalities. That's already happening. So you're going to be competing with your sticker and advert on a billboard against a close friend of the customer, authentically engaging them in something new. And that's a very hard thing to compete with. And I think this is where creating context where fans can engage with other fans and going from advertising to some other model of much more authentic engagement with a new concept, I think can work a lot better. I think this is what's this going to hit? This is going to hit the bottom line of what people are willing to spend on this type of advertising.
My next question, and this is one that we asked a lot in season 1 during a bear market, which may have been more appropriate, and now is a lot harder to kind of ask, but there's still a lot of crypto skeptics out there. Blockchain skeptics. I think the numbers of those are waning for sure. What do you think they're right about?
Nobody has built a really great consumer application yet. The UX is still terrible. Why, after 14 years, is the UX terrible? And why do I have to build a blockchain to get 500,000 transactions a second? Why has no one built an actual piece of infrastructure that can support, more transactions than, Royal Mail happens to deliver letters in my local area? It just doesn't make sense. And I think the reason these skeptics are right is because, once again, people haven't built really great enduring products and companies that ordinary people can use. The other challenge is a lot of crypto is about crypto and crypto people, and no one cares about that, right? For me, crypto should be like a sewer. It exists underneath our cities to keep us clean and make things great. I don't want to walk through the sewer. I don't want to hear about the sewer every day. I don't want to have to configure the sewer, and I think in that sense, people are right. The people who are totally wrong, though, are the people who are like,
my next question.
Yeah, it's I don't have to, I think we're all pretty clear that it's not going away. It's literally been, if you had a kid when crypto came out, they're in college now. So they
probably caused this bull run,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. Little Timmy is now to be like, it's a fad, but this is the entire span of my life, right? It doesn't make sense, It's kind of amazing how people can still believe something that has lasted longer than the last 4 presidencies is still a fad. It just is kind of wild on some level.
It's not even that to me. It's when you see it disrupting almost every industry in a different way, like the A16Z crypto report that came out in, I think 2 or 3 months ago, 34% of the volume in crypto is stablecoins. And that has, the stablecoin market has grown completely decoupled from the cyclical nature of crypto. And you're like, yeah, because that's an actual use case. So I can send you money in Uganda, Argentina, Netherlands, Portugal, or the US, and it's faster, cheaper,
and can't be confiscated very easily. Yeah.
But it's if you build something that is just better than its predecessor using this technology, that just stops people saying, "Oh, this is."
I think stable coins are like email. They're not. If you were to go back
email for money.
If you were to go back in time and tell people about the internet, email is important, but it's by far maybe the least disruptive thing that's happened. But without email,
at the time.
but without email, like you wouldn't, what would have been the point, right? So I think, yeah, it's like email. It's like step one in that journey. Again, the challenge I've found getting into crypto late and building infrastructure, now in this kind of new generation of crypto is like you have to think in a very decentralized way.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that create a lot of value, it's very difficult for people who are used to building centralized organizations to kind of change their minds into how that really operates. And I think we're going to see like decentralized versions of a lot, like there are algorithmic stablecoins, for example. I know that's somewhat less popular now, but I think people will come up with mechanisms for generating other types of algorithmic value. There's no really good financial, mathematical, or economic reason why that can't work. And those are really weird and different from normal currencies.
There's a couple that are like, again, unpopular because of what happened with Luna, but like there are things that are happening that are going to be so really interesting.
I don't personally think now is the moment for that, but I do think that that's a good example of something that's not quite email, it's something else.
And you mentioned the kind of like AI revolution, the kind of like we talked about chatbots, agents. The money they use might be different to the money that human uses.
No, I mean it definitely will be, because have you tried opening a bank account? Now, if I make a bot today for like a 15-minute experiment and I wanted to have money, are you proposing that I get it a passport or a birth certificate? How is that going to work exactly, right? So programmatic money, I think, is an inevitability consequence of where we are. But the thing to appreciate is like everything's changing so quickly that we've become numb to the speed of change. It's almost like the second derivative or third derivative or whatever of change. It's like it's not even like it was when we were growing up when everything doubled every 2 years. Things happen now every week. And I feel like this is maybe a real challenge for rights holders and brands, where it's often they just want to wait and see. They don't want to get involved. So having some kind of experimental like aspect to your allocation, I just think is more important than ever, because you can't learn without doing.
The other thing about it is when a black swan, well, I call it a black swan event, but something like FTX happens, there are a lot of people who are like, damn, this sets us back like 10 years. And then 2 years later, you see exchanges partnering with banks. And so like, again, if I went to you and we met the eve after that and I went, wow, this is going to be heavy. Like, when do you think an exchange will partner with like a regulated bank in Europe or the US? You'd probably say 5 years, but like it happens in more than half the time. And I do think we are at that kind of step change now where we're at that part of the S-curve for sure. Like that's my opinion. No,
I agree totally. And I think we're going to see this massive confluence where a combination of like the next wave of the metaverse, which benefits heavily from programmatic money and virtual assets, the next wave of crypto and the next wave of AI kind of come together, which is why those are the three areas my company focuses on. As a venture builder, people are like, people are like, why do those three things, joking aside? And I'm like, because they all relate to each other. They all accelerate each other in different ways. Yeah.
Makes total sense. A couple of final questions. I mean, I want to talk a bit about Web3 gaming. Gaming, biggest entertainment market. We mentioned it earlier. It's kind of trumped movies, it's trumped sport, it's trumped almost everything. Had a bit of a lull since COVID and lots of layoffs, and there's been some difficulties there. Web3 gaming or crypto gaming, blockchain gaming, whatever you want to talk about, it had a pretty strong year in 2024. I'm still a bit like, tokens for games specifically, that the kind of like incentivization issues that we talked about, where you have like VC player, etc. Like me and you play a game, we wake up and the token's worth like 10x less than it was because someone in Korea decided to dump all their tokens. Feels quite weird.
It is. And look, but I think the way to think about, there are sort of different economic problems in games that tokens can actually solve. Right. The first problem is advertising a new free-to-play game will set you back like $30 a user or something. So at that point, why not just give them $10, right, in order to play as early? Because in a matchmaking queue, the other thing that this type of media has, it's not in common with other media, is who else is playing deeply affects your fun. So incentivizing people to perform actions, particularly when a game is in an early stage, could be a great way to kind of cold start an ecosystem. The second opportunity is that people want to carry value from the investment they spend in one activity to another. I can evidence that because black hole games like Call of Duty or Fortnite, one of the things they do well is I don't have to remake my account and retake things for whatever faddish new experience is going to be popular in this month, the next month. So there is a real pathway to doing that, but it requires a very different mindset in the games industry. I should say that the games industry is incredibly conservative and facing a lot of headwinds, and having spent a decade kind of building games and kind of selling technology into the games industry, it's not where I wouldn't start with traditional games companies or traditional crypto businesses. I think you almost need new studios that have great games talent and great crypto talent. And, we're looking to back teams like that right now because honestly, where game developers have absolutely hated crypto. After 10,000 layoffs this year, last year, and the year before, people are now much more open-minded to doing something in that space.
And I had Nigel Eckles on season 1 of the podcast, co-founder of FanDuel. He's just started another crypto business. And I asked him about Web3 gaming because it kind of just randomly came up. And his thing was, if it's just Call of Duty with a token, I don't know if that's going to work. It has to be something really different, a different distribution mechanism. The game has to feel different. And actually with Telegram gaming, to some extent, that new distribution mechanism plus token integration has created a big waterfall effect. On the other hand, we've seen Off the Grid with guns basically do a shoot 'em up game with a token. Where do
all
you
of the above?
You think all of it could be?
I mean, games are like, it's not you can't really look at the industry as like a series of trends. It's a series of products, and the individual products totally transform what everyone else does. Most people who are successful in the games industry just copy things. That's what they do. I mean, that's before. For the longest time, everyone told me no one would ever want to play a video game with more than 16 people aside in a shooter. It's just crazy things like that. And then you see Battle Royale pop up, or people said no one's ever going to play a shooter on mobile. And then Knives Out happened in China and just exploded. And then we saw every other shooter kind of move to mobile, and those things happen. It takes an example, right? And so what will happen now is, because of the regulatory changes in the US, when those things are codified correctly, so that's like, let's say next year, year after, big game developers will suddenly get comfortable with the idea of tokens again. Then they'll bring games into development. Those games will take another 2-3 years. And then we will see really big IP start to do stuff with tokens, right? And the reality is, if they do that, they'll crush it, right? Just like it took a very long time for Call of Duty to go free to play. A lot of free to play happened before they did. It took a very long time for Call of Duty to eventually decide to do Battle Royale. They will eventually throw in tokens too, because they're struggling to think about how to monetize people beyond what they already do.
And sometimes I do think if you're a big brand in the space, not being first mover sometimes has its benefits.
Distribution is the only thing that matters in games. I look at opportunities now. I don't even care what the game is as much as I used to. I only care about what they're going to do to not have to spend $30 a fan. The game absolutely matters, but only as a secondary effect of that, right? And so that's the key issue. And if you have distribution, you have an enormous opportunity to kind of capture value. The people that tokens are bad for are probably Fortnite and Roblox, because they can't easily retrofit their economies to do that without putting a lot of value back in the market. Like, they go from an 80% take rate to like a lot less. And that's an interesting innovator's dilemma problem for them. It's one of the reasons why both companies have like publicly said they don't like crypto. It's relating to that, I think.
And I remember writing a piece about, formerly FIFA Ultimate Team, now EA Ultimate Team. And I think there was a Masari crypto report written by a very smart person, but that I don't think understood their game economy that well. And they wrote something like, FIFA are leaving about $1.1 billion on the table by not integrating NFTs. And I was like, well, it makes $7 billion a year. Why? And it's a seasonal thing. The rights are seasonal, and they sell a new game, and there's a new Ultimate Team every year. And I'm like, why would they risk the 7 million? Even if you're right, why would they risk the 7 billion for that extra 1 billion?
No, sure, please? But I think that, and also he's kind of maybe missing the biggest opportunity, which is the opportunity isn't lies for FIFA. It lies for the rights holder. The rights holder is the one that should say, you know what? I'm no longer just selling like a big license. Now I'm providing a programmatic license on the blockchain to specific players, IP, teams, whatever. All of a sudden, people can start to integrate those assets who are the long tail of developers who maybe couldn't have afforded the larger license. And the bigger license owners, you can have a much more pay-as-you-go experience with them, right? I think I'd love to see licenses move towards almost, crypto-powered subscriptions, right? That's going to make those licenses far more valuable.
Yeah, because if you have a centralized asset IP issuer on a decentralized network,
precisely,
that can, I see where you're going.
Yeah, and then why not even share some of the value with the players and the sub-IP holders? Why not have franchise owners and IP holders have that opportunity? The whole idea that every 8 years we're going to sell hundreds of billions of dollars worth of licenses and then go again, that's going to be challenged by a lot of different things, including the fact that people buying them, I think there's only so much more they can pay. And, we're getting to that limit. So I think being proactive as an industry towards, different license options could be really powerful.
Anything we haven't covered that you really want to cover?
Yeah, just I think it would be really interesting to think about how the combination of games, AI, sport start to really change the types of experiences people can have. I think right now it's the kind of interactive experiences you can have in sport games are like replications of the game themselves. Really curious to see like what wholly new things people start to create, right? That take that IP in really weird directions. I don't know if you saw the NFL Toy Story, NFL Disney collaboration where you could watch the game. But yeah. So I think we're going to see, this is the age of really weird collabs, I would say.
I was going to actually say, because it's a huge fan acquisition tool, gaming. Like so many people, I've got a friend who supports Bolton because he played with them on FIFA.
Completely. I mean, it's funny that you call that the fan acquisition tool because it's almost backwards from a monetization perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
They probably make more money from FIFA per fan than, But I agree. I think the social parts of it are what make it such a powerful tool.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And I do think this, because sports and gaming are so joined at the hip, why we've started to ask more questions about gaming is because I think blockchain is going to disrupt that industry massively. And so when those things are joined at the hip with Madden, with NBA 2K, with EA FC and so on and so forth, it's going to be a pretty big convergence piece.
I agree.
Right, well, thank you so much for listening, everyone, or watching, whichever way you've consumed this. Herman, where can people find out more about you?
Well, of course on Twitter, but also you can look up M Squared, Somnia, the blockchain, and Improbable. We have a ton of information out there.
Amazing. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Sport and Crypto newsletter. Every Monday, we write a piece on the intersection of Web3 and sports. You can find that at newsletter.sportandcrypto.com. You can find me at Pet Barisha on X and LinkedIn. And you can find us on our website, sportandcrypto.com. Just remember that none of what we have said during this show is financial or business advice, and this content is for informational purposes only. Web3 is underpinned by crypto, and crypto is volatile, meaning you can lose money if you're buying these assets personally or as a business. Also, the majority of crypto asset companies are unregulated. Leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed this, or give us some feedback if you didn't enjoy it that much. Probably Herman's fault, not mine. And we'll have more Sport and Crypto content for you soon.